and you've been a model for the Ontario landowners across the province of Ontario. And I'd like to congratulate all of you for doing a great job and for your leaders, Bob Mackey and Dave Honey. So congratulations to you. You've helped a lot of individuals that have already been mentioned tonight and more. Nobody more than Bob Mackey. I don't think anybody's fought a longer and tougher battle against the Niagara Escarpment Commission. They've landed on him hard and heavy for doing nothing other than trying to run a small archery business that is accepted in the community and doing something good for the community. And it's just absurd as what's happening to him, and the stress he's gone through, he and Yvette, and the persistence and strength that he's shown has been a model to all landowners across the province of Ontario, Bob, and we're proud to stand with you and follow you. Thank you. I'll tell you a little bit about me, just to bore you a little bit right off the start here. I am a farmer, and that's something I'm very proud of. I live on our family farm, we work on our family farm, and I continue to farm. Even though I'm busy with my new job as an MPP, I love farming, and I continue to do that. We have a hired man at home who does it, and he's really good because I phone him up and I say, how's it going? And he always tells me it's going really well, so that makes me feel really good. That's usually on payday, but unfortunately we have good help at home, and I do enjoy the crops. I love, like I say, I love going back home when things aren't going so good at the legislature or when it was with the Landowners Association. I'd say I'd go and I'd talk to my cows, you know, and they never argued with me and they're never unreasonable. They always kicked me with purpose, and I understood why. So our farm was a Crown grant to our family in 1826. And that's something I'm very, very proud of. And we have our Crown grant, and it's something that I place great value in. And I've learned that value from the Ontario Landowners Association. We always had the piece of paper, the Crown grant, around the house, but I never really understood what it was and the power that it held. And I do now. And I think everybody in this room understands that now, or if you don't, you should take it seriously. You've heard Cindy speak very well about it. You'll hear Liz Marshall speak about it. And it is an important document. It means a lot to you. It's your rights as a landowner, and make sure you keep that and feel strongly about it. And if you ever have any doubts, talk to the leaders of the Ontario Landowners Association to clarify if you don't understand things. I've worked, before I got involved with the Ontario Landowners Association, I was farming, and I got involved with farm organizations, so that's representing your industry, advocating on behalf of your industry. So I was part of the Soil and Crop Improvement Association at one time, the Cattlemen's Association, because we had some beef cows, and the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, over a period of, say, 15 years, I think it was. I ended up, always for me, property rights was the most important thing because land was our greatest asset. And I think every farmer, every landowner would have to say that your land and your property is your greatest asset. And increasingly government, as we all know, is coming along with more laws, more regulations that place land use restrictions on your private property that take away from you the ability to own, use, enjoy, and profit from your private property. What I found with the farm organizations was they had not much appetite for fighting for confrontation. They wanted to go to, say, farm meetings and talk about breeding cattle or growing crops, which are very good things. But nobody had an appetite to really go to the politicians and say, or the ministries of whatever ministry was involved, you're doing something wrong, you're coming onto my property, and I don't want you to be there, or you're drafting up a law or a bylaw or a regulation that's going to hurt me or my industry. And often I ended up, because I felt strongly about property rights, being the person who would go to the council or the level of government that was required to speak to. I guess you might say I kind of got a little bit of enjoyment out of that, unfortunately, which led me down this political road, and here I am now roasting in hell. Actually, it's not that bad. So when the Landowners Association started in 2003, by that time I was just getting a little disappointed in the farm groups for not being aggressive enough about fighting for property rights and farmers' rights in general. And when the Landowners Association came along under the leadership of Randy Hillier in the spring of 2003, 10 years ago, I was reading in the papers about this radical redneck group, Cindy, like you were talking about, from the bush and Lanark, and I thought, holy mackerel, what a wild bunch of guys these are. But then you start to listen, and they make some sense. And they're talking about government intrusion into our lives and into our property, and they're fighting back. And they had the strength, and Randy Hillier showed us that we can say no, we can fight, and government will back up. And we learned that we can win battles. So it was a wonderful example that we can stand up and we can fight, and that we have a lot of strength because we are the people. And we have all the power in the world if we choose to exercise it. There's all kinds of great writers and great quotes around. Like one of the greatest ones was, I think it was David Henry Thoreau, who said, "I am a majority of one," which means you are powerful because you make a decision and you go ahead. So I showed up at some Lanark landowners meetings, and one day Randy pointed at me and said, "Jack McLaren is the director of the Lanark Landowners Association." So that's how democracy works in the Lanark Landowners Association. If you show up, you're elected. And so I looked around, and it seemed to be unanimous because nobody objected, so there I was. And then it evolved, and so then we founded the Carleton Landowners Association, which is rural Ottawa, in 2005, and I was president because nobody else wanted the job. And then in 2006, as Randy, who was president, went around the province of Ontario, there was no Ontario Landowners Association at that time. But he got great calls to come and speak to people in halls like this about just the ability of people to stand up and fight back against bad government. And so he was spreading the message across Ontario as he got called to go and speak, and then new county groups formed. And by 2006, there was 10 county landowner groups in Ontario. And we formed, in February 2006, the Ontario Landowners Association as an umbrella group over all the county groups, of which there was 10, and we formed a constitution. So the Ontario Landowners Association is a more formal body with a proper constitution, which is the rules you work by. Most of the county groups do not have constitutions. They don't need them, generally speaking. But we thought the Ontario landowners should have rules. That was 2006. In 2007, Randy stepped down from being president of the Ontario Landowners Association, pursued a political career, and got elected in the fall of 2007 as an MPP, and he continues to be an MPP with the PC party, and he's doing a tremendous job, by the way. He's probably the most knowledgeable, clever politician in Queen's Park. There's 107 of them. He knows the rules better than anybody. And when things get tough, they always turn to Randy and say, "What do we do? We got a problem. What are the rules? What are the tools to solve whatever problem it might be?" He and I have a little trouble being accepted because of our landowner background. People aren't just really embracing us. I think it's not a matter, I would say they're fearful because we're principled people, and we would not compromise, hopefully, try not to anyways, and we don't. And so we're not really embraced and brought into the fold completely. That's a good thing, because it just means that I think we're on the right track when that happens. So Randy got elected in 2007, so I took over as president of the Ontario Landowners when he stepped down. I did that for 3.5 years. That was the hardest job I ever had in my life. And by that, and I don't mean that in a funny way, it was the hardest job I ever had in my life. It's volunteer work, and it continues to be volunteer work. But every day, the phone and the emails and the fax machines ran all morning, and at noon, I had to get up and go to work because I had to buy groceries. I literally had to get up and walk away from the phone, or I would have been there 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I'm sure Tom Black is finding exactly the same thing, and Bob Mackey and Dave, any of you have been leaders, and Cindy, it's busy. And the calls come, like at 8 o'clock in the morning when the young Mennonite fellow called you, and he's in dire trouble, and you know he's in trouble. We all know that. We've all had these calls. We know how serious it is. When the Williams family called, we know what you're going through. It's terrible. It's always terrible. And we get that. And we know that we have to go out there and help you people. And that's a very draining thing, I'll tell you folks, when you get all these calls from people all over Ontario, and they're always the same. Government is knocking on my door. What do I do? Help me. And you just know how bad it is for those people at the other end. So I think, we have so many great people with the leadership here at Niagara, Huron Perth with Cindy, and so many other groups. There's lots of great leaders in the Ontario Landowners Association. And what I say to media is, when they say, what do you do? I say, we help people. I'm going to digress just for a minute on a little bit of a story that I like to tell. This isn't so much a landowner story as a political story. So shortly after I got elected, which was a year and a half ago, in October, so in December, so I was very new at my job, and I'm in Ottawa. The Ottawa Citizen called me up about a week before Christmas, just a little over a year ago. And they said, there's a guy named Larry, he's in the hospital. It's a sad story. He's about 55, he's got bad diabetes. He lost a leg below the knee in the spring. He's been in this Elizabeth Bruyere hospital all summer, recuperating. On Labor Day, they said, Larry, you're well enough to go home. And he lived with his wife in a very modest home. They were kind of poor, so there wasn't much money in the bank. And so you can go home now on Labor Day because you're well enough. But he's in a wheelchair, and he didn't have a ramp, and it would cost $5,000 to build a ramp to go in to get up to the door of his house. So he had to stay in the hospital because March of Dimes, which does those kind of things, their budget was blowing. They didn't have any more money, so there was no money to build a ramp. So he had to stay in the hospital at about $900 to $1,000 a day, and he'd been there from Labor Day till it was almost Christmas, the middle of December. So the purpose of this call was, so I'm a member of the PC party. The government is Liberal. It's before Christmas, and I think what the reporter wanted to do, and he left a message on my answer machine, was of course to have me bash Liberals. Normally that's good fun. But this was just before Christmas, and I was kind of winding down from the political life and thinking family time and Christmas. And I thought, Jesus, I just don't feel like bashing Liberals tomorrow morning when I phone that reporter back, because I figured that's what he wanted done. So I got thinking, here's poor Larry. He's in the hospital, and it's just a real tough time for him. He can't get home because there's no ramp, and he has no money, and so all he needs. So I think, and of course the cost was $1,000 a day for 100 days. So he's been there for $100,000 worth of government money. When a $5,000 ramp would have solved the problem. So there's bad health care spending for you. So the reporter was going to say, isn't that terrible that the Liberals are wasting all this money, $95,000, when $5,000 would have got him out of the hospital and freed the room up for somebody else. So I called up Tom Black, president of the landowners, who's a good friend of mine, doesn't live so far away. And I said, Tom, here's a guy with a problem, he needs a ramp. Do you think we could build him a ramp? And get him home for Christmas. So this would have to happen quick, like within the week, and it was a weekend coming up, and we had to get Larry's permission and his wife's permission and measure up the house, et cetera, find some guys to drive some nails. So to make a long story short, that was on Thursday. On Friday, Larry said he'd like to have the ramp because we went to visit him. On Saturday, his wife showed us the house, and we measured it up. And Saturday, we had about half a dozen of us fat, gray-haired old fellas, or pot-bellied old gray-haired fellas, Bob, who decided we could drive nails for a few days and make a ramp. And we went to Home Depot and said, we need some lumber. Would you consider giving us a break on the price? And so they gave us about 90% off. So the labor was free. We had a warm garage to work in. We built a ramp over the weekend, and one guy had a crane. We'll crane the truck. We put it in, had it installed on Monday. And on Tuesday, Larry came home and we sang Christmas carols and had the media out. That's the political party. I mean, right? You can't do anything without the media. That's my life. But it was a wonderful